My wife got sucked for online feminism and demoted me to a bill-paying roommate, so I stepped back. And what came next left her speechless. I, a 34-year-old male, still remember the exact moment when those words left Jessica's lips. Jessica, a 32-year-old female, said, "Not tonight or any night." The finality in her voice made my body go cold. We'd been married for 6 years, and yeah, things hadn't been perfect lately, but I never expected something so final about our intimate life. Some background about me. I'm a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company in the Midwest. It's nothing fancy, but it pays the bills, and I've been steadily climbing the ladder. I've been there about 8 years now. I met Jessica in college during our junior year. She was studying psychology, I was in business. We clicked right away. Both of us were ambitious but down to earth. We dated for 3 years before getting married in a modest ceremony with about 80 guests, mostly family and close friends. Jessica worked as an HR consultant and made decent money. We bought a 3-bedroom house in a nice suburb about 4 years ago. No kids yet. We were both focused on our careers first. I always thought we had a good thing going. We both contributed to the household, took vacations twice a year, usually one beach trip and one visiting family, and had a decent social circle of other couples our age. It was a pretty normal life, you know? Nothing extraordinary, but stable and comfortable. At least, that's what I thought. That evening started like any other normal day. I came home from work, tired after a 10-hour day dealing with client nonsense and a presentation that didn't go as well as I hoped. I was looking forward to seeing Jessica, maybe ordering some takeout, watching a movie, the usual stuff couples do. The moment I walked in, I could tell something was off. She was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with this weird intensity. We had dinner while talking about boring stuff, her coworkers' drama, my project deadline, the usual crap. Then we moved to the living room, where she continued scrolling through her phone, probably on one of those feminist Instagram accounts she'd been obsessed with lately, while I watched some random show on TV. When I leaned over to kiss her neck, something that used to make her smile, she pulled away sharply, like I'd tried to stab her or something. "Don't," she said, not even looking up from her damn screen. "I'm not in the mood." "You haven't been in the mood for weeks now," I replied, trying hard not to sound frustrated, even though I totally was. "Is everything okay?" That's when she put down her phone, looked me straight in the eyes with this cold expression I'd never seen before, and delivered those crushing words, "Not tonight or any night." I'm done with that part of our relationship. My mind raced through a million possible responses, but I just sat there like an idiot, my mouth probably hanging open. How do you even reply to someone suddenly ending physical intimacy in a marriage? No explanation, no room for discussion, just a one-sided decision that affected us both. "What exactly do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, hoping I misunderstood. "Exactly what I said," she continued, her voice weirdly calm, like she was explaining something to a child. "I'm comfortable with our life together, the house, our social circle, the stability, but I'm no longer interested in physical intimacy with you or any man. I've been reading a lot about how women are conditioned to provide physical affection to men, and I've decided I'm not participating in that patriarchal expectation anymore. You can accept it or not, that's your choice." Holy shit. She'd been getting deeper into that radical feminist stuff online recently, but I never thought it would affect our relationship. I was completely blindsided. "So, you're just unilaterally deciding that our marriage doesn't include physical intimacy anymore, without any discussion?" I asked, trying to understand. "I don't need your permission to set boundaries with my own body," she replied, her tone getting that edge I'd come to recognize whenever she was quoting something from her online groups. "The fact that you think this requires a discussion just shows how entitled men are to women's bodies." I sat back, completely stunned. "Jessica, this isn't about entitlement. This is about our relationship, about connection and intimacy between partners who supposedly love each other. Love doesn't mean I have to perform physical acts I no longer want to participate in," she countered. "When did this change? When did you stop wanting to be with me that way?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Just 2 months ago, things had seemed normal." She shrugged. "It's been building for a while. I've just finally found the courage to vocalize it instead of performing for your benefit." That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't bear to lie next to someone who had just shattered my understanding of our entire relationship. The next few days were weird as hell. We continued living together, eating together, even watching TV together, all while this invisible wall had been built between us. She acted like her declaration was as ordinary as announcing she wanted to change grocery stores or something, not the complete reshaping of our marriage. I tried bringing up counseling over breakfast 3 days after her announcement. I found a couples therapist with good reviews. "I think we should talk to someone about what's going on between us." "We don't need therapy," she responded dismissively, rolling her eyes. There's nothing wrong with me, and I'm not going to be pressured into physical intimacy I don't want just because society expects it. Maybe you should get therapy for your dependency on female validation. Jesus Christ. Of course, she was right about not being pressured. I would never do that. But her complete unwillingness to even talk about this sudden change left me feeling like I was living with a stranger wearing my wife's face. Everything I said was twisted to make me sound like some kind of oppressor. At night, lying on my side of our now purely functional bed, I'd moved back from the couch, determined not to be displaced in my own home. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how I missed the gradual breakdown of our connection. Had I been so absorbed in work that I failed to notice her pulling away? Or had she hidden her feelings until reaching some breaking point I never saw coming? I reviewed our recent history, looking for signs. Sure, our sex life had slowed down somewhat over the past year, but that seemed normal for a couple married 6+ years, both working demanding jobs. We still had date nights, still held hands during movies, still told each other I love you before bed, or at least we had until recently. One thing became clear real fast: I was now in a marriage where I was neither wanted nor needed in any meaningful way. I was simply convenient, a contributor to bills, a social partner for couple-oriented gatherings, a housemate who helped maintain our outward image of marital success. Just another evil man she could point to when talking to her new friends about how she was setting boundaries. I tried one more time to understand, catching her on a Saturday morning when we were both home. Jessica, I'm trying to respect your feelings, but I need to understand better what's happening. Did I do something wrong? Is there something I can change? She sighed dramatically, like my question was the most exhausting thing she'd ever heard. This is exactly the problem with men. You think everything is about you. This is about my journey and my autonomy. The fact that you're making it about what you did wrong just proves my point. But we're married, I said, frustration building. Your decisions affect me too. So what? You think your entitlement to my body outweighs my right to control it? This is why the patriarchy persists. Because men like you can't handle women making their own choices. I walked away from that conversation feeling completely hopeless. There was no reasoning with her, no finding common ground. She had created a narrative where any disagreement with her position just confirmed her worldview about oppressive men. 2 weeks after her declaration, I found myself sitting in my car outside our house, unable to summon the energy to go inside. What was waiting for me there? Another evening of polite coexistence with someone who had unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship without any real explanation? Another lecture about how I was part of the problem for expecting basic human connection in a marriage? That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could continue living in this emotional desert, hoping for rain that would never come, or I could redirect my time, attention, and resources towards something or someone that offered at least the possibility of growth. As I finally walked through our front door, a plan was forming in my mind. Not revenge or some dramatic confrontation, at least not yet, but something more powerful, a complete redirection of my life's energy. If she had moved on from me without physically leaving, maybe I could do the same. My redirection began with small changes. I set my alarm for 5:30 in the morning, a full hour before she would wake up. Those quiet morning hours quickly became sacred to me, time that was completely my own, free from her judgmental stares and passive-aggressive comments. I started with 20 minutes of meditation, something I'd always dismissed as impractical with my busy schedule. To my surprise, that brief period of morning stillness helped clear my mind of the constant thoughts about my failing marriage. Next came physical exercise. Nothing dramatic at first, just basic push-ups, sit-ups, and a short run around the neighborhood. By the time she emerged from our bedroom, I had already showered, dressed, and started my day with purpose. "You're up early," she commented on the third day, finding me sipping coffee and reading at the kitchen table. The slight annoyance in her voice was obvious. She was used to me being half asleep while she dominated the morning space. "Just making some changes," I replied casually, not offering any further explanation. She didn't ask for one, just made some comment under her breath about toxic masculinity and exercise culture that I pretended not to hear. The second week, I joined a gym near my office. Instead of rushing home after work to an increasingly uncomfortable environment, I spent an hour working out. The physical exertion became a form of therapy. Each rep pushed out another fragment of resentment and self-pity. I started fantasizing about the future, one where Jessica wasn't the center of my universe. I also reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage, guys Jessica had always disliked for being too masculine or problematic. Nothing dramatic, just casual lunches and after-work drinks with soda or coffee. I was careful not to mention my marital situation. These meetings weren't about seeking sympathy or bad-mouthing my wife. They were about rebuilding connections that had nothing to do with my identity as a husband to an increasingly hostile woman. What was really interesting was realizing how many other guys were going through similar shit. Not identical, but the same pattern. Wives or girlfriends who had gradually transformed into critical strangers, constantly finding fault with normal male behavior while expecting the financial benefits and emotional support to continue unchanged. My buddy Chris, a 36-year-old male, was dealing with a girlfriend who had suddenly decided that his video gaming hobby was problematic, despite having dated him for 3 years knowing it was his main way to decompress. My college friend Mark, a 35-year-old male, couldn't post anything on social media without his wife publicly commenting to correct his thinking on various social issues. "It's like they want us to be both mind readers and punching bags," Chris said during one of our lunch meetups. "You can't win." That phrase stuck with me. You can't win. Not if you keep playing by constantly changing rules you had no say in creating. So maybe the answer was to stop playing altogether and create my own game. I started setting aside money in a separate account Jessica couldn't access. Nothing dramatic that would affect our household contributions. Just redirecting my discretionary spending and slowly building a safety net. If nothing else, it gave me a sense of control in a situation where I felt increasingly powerless. 1 month into my redirection, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The daily workouts had started reshaping my body, shoulders broader, stomach flatter. My posture had improved, and the constant tension that had knotted my shoulders for months had eased. But the most significant change was in my eyes. They looked focused, alive in a way they hadn't been since her declaration. I updated my wardrobe next. Nothing flashy or desperate, just well-fitted clothes that suited my improving physique and projected confidence. When I wore a new shirt to dinner with friends, several people commented on how good I looked. "You've lost weight, haven't you?" our friend Melissa asked during a dinner party. "Just been taking better care of myself," I replied with a smile. Jessica noticed too, though she tried to disguise her interest with criticism. "Isn't that shirt a little tight?" she asked one morning as I was getting ready for work. "Seems like you're trying way too hard. Very midlife crisis energy." I just smiled and left without responding, which seemed to annoy her even more. The redirection extended to my finances as well. We always maintained separate accounts alongside our joint one for household expenses. I continued contributing my share to our joint obligations, but redirected my discretionary spending. The expensive trip to a women's retreat in Costa Rica that Jessica had been hinting about for our anniversary? That money went instead into a high-yield investment account under only my name. I also invested in a photography workshop, a passion I had abandoned years ago after Jessica complained about the time it took away from us. Ironic now, considering her stance. Photography got me outdoors on weekends, hiking to capture landscapes at dawn when the light was perfect. These solo excursions became another form of meditation. Behind the camera, framing each shot, I found a state of flow that allowed me to forget everything else. I invested in decent equipment, nothing outrageous, but a good DSLR camera and a couple of quality lenses. My first few attempts were pretty amateur, but I watched tutorials online and practiced constantly. Soon, I was capturing images I was genuinely proud of. Mountain landscapes bathed in early morning light, close-ups of frost patterns on fallen leaves, dramatic storm clouds gathering over fields. I started posting my work online, connecting with other photographers and building a small following that appreciated my eye for composition. Some of my photos even started selling as prints through an online marketplace, creating a small but growing side income that went straight into my separate account. "Where have you been going so early on Saturdays?" she asked after several weeks of my new routine, the entitlement in her voice crystal clear. She was used to me being available whenever she wanted. "Taking photographs," I answered simply. "Since when are you into photography?" The accusatory tone, like I needed her permission to have hobbies. "I've always been into it, I just haven't had the time to pursue it until now." Her expression suggested she wanted to ask more but couldn't quite figure out how, or perhaps didn't want to show too much interest in my life, after having so deliberately stepped back from it. "Well, I needed help with some things around the house last weekend, but you were nowhere to be found," she complained. Typical, no interest in my activities, just how they inconvenienced her. "You could have texted," I replied calmly. "Phone works even in the mountains." "I shouldn't have to text my own husband to get basic help," she snapped. I just shrugged. Things change. Those 2 words hung in the air between us, and I saw something flicker across her face. The first hint that she was beginning to realize her declaration might have consequences she hadn't anticipated. At work, my renewed focus paid off big time. I approached projects with clarity and confidence that hadn't been there during the months of marital distress. My boss, Rob, a 45-year-old male, noticed the change. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," he said after I successfully landed a major client that had been on the fence for months. "You're on fire lately." The compliment meant more than it should have after months of feeling unwanted at home. Professional recognition filled some of the void, not completely, but enough to keep moving forward. I volunteered for projects that required travel, something I'd avoided in the past to spend more time with Jessica. A 3-day conference in Chicago, a week-long training in Denver, a client meeting in Boston. Each trip was a breath of fresh air. Hotel rooms where I could spread out without judgment. Meals where no one made snide comments about my choices. Conversations with people who didn't view every interaction through an ideological lens. During my Denver trip, I met up with an old college friend, Tom, who had moved there years ago. We hiked in the mountains, and I took some of my best photos yet. When I posted them online, my follower count jumped significantly, and I sold 3 prints within a week. "You know, you could actually turn this into a serious side business," Tom said as we rested at a scenic overlook. "Your eye for composition is really good." His casual encouragement planted a seed in my mind. What if photography wasn't just an escape? What if it could be something more substantial, a potential path to a different future? 3 months into my redirection, I was sleeping better, looking better, and performing better in nearly every aspect of my life, except my marriage, which remained this empty shell of formal interactions and parallel existences. The irony wasn't lost on me. In withdrawing her affection, Jessica had inadvertently pushed me toward becoming a stronger version of myself. It was like the universe's weird way of compensating. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd opened a separate checking account and started routing 50% of my paychecks there, including my performance bonuses. The other 50% was more than enough to cover my share of our joint expenses. I was building my escape fund, dollar by dollar. Not that I was planning to leave yet. I wanted to see how this played out first. One evening, as I prepared to leave for a photography meetup, she asked an unexpected question. "Are you seeing someone else?" The entitlement in her voice was unbelievable. She could end our physical relationship unilaterally, but still expected exclusive access to my time and attention. I paused by the door, camera bag over my shoulder. "No," I answered truthfully. "Why would you ask that?" "You've changed," she said, her voice carrying a note I couldn't identify. "You're hardly ever home anymore." The hypocrisy of her concern almost made me laugh. "I'm just redirecting my time and energy into things that fulfill me," I replied, using her own clinical approach. "Isn't that what you've been doing?" "That's different," she responded, clearly irritated that I'd used her own logic against her. "I made a personal choice about my body and autonomy, and I'm making personal choices about my time and interests," I countered. "Seems perfectly fair to me." "So, you're what, punishing me?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "Not at all," I replied. "I'm adapting to our new reality. You set a boundary, and I respect that. I'm simply setting boundaries of my own." She had no response to that, and I left without waiting for one. As I drove to meet my photography friends, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since her declaration, I wasn't desperately hoping for her to change her mind. I was too busy creating a life that no longer centered around her approval or affection. I met my photography group at a local park, where we were practicing night photography techniques. Among them was a guy named David, who worked for a local magazine. "These are really good," he said, looking through some of my recent shots on my camera's display. "We're always looking for local talent for our nature section. Would you be interested in submitting some work?" Just like that, another door opened. By the time I got home that night, Jessica was already in bed, probably annoyed that I hadn't been there to listen to her latest complaints about her KIO workers or patriarchal oppression. I didn't care. I had bigger things on my mind. The pivotal moment came during a company retreat 6 months into my redirection. My team had gathered at this lakeside resort for a weekend of strategic planning and team building. After a productive day of meetings, we relaxed around a fire pit, sharing stories and snacks under the stars. My colleague Emma, a 29-year-old female who had joined the marketing department 3 months earlier, sat down beside me. Emma was pretty much Jessica's opposite, warm, supportive, and actually interested in other people's lives. "You know, when I first started, everyone told me how lucky I was to be working with you," she said, her voice quiet enough that only I could hear. "Really? Why is that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They said you'd completely transformed the department's performance, but they also mentioned how much you've changed personally over the past few months." She hesitated, then added, "They said you used to be withdrawn, almost sad. That doesn't match the person I've known." I stared into the flames, considering how to respond. Let's just say I went through some personal challenges and decided to focus on what I could control, rather than what I couldn't. She nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. You seem completely in your element now." As our conversation continued into the evening, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. Emma was intelligent and insightful, with a sharp sense of humor that repeatedly caught me off guard. We discovered shared interests in photography and hiking, and she seemed genuinely impressed when I showed her some of my recent work on my phone. "These are amazing," she said, leaning closer to swipe through the gallery. "You have a real talent. Have you considered showing these professionally?" "Actually, I just started selling some prints online, and a local magazine might feature a few," I replied, surprised at how good it felt to share this part of my life with someone who genuinely seemed to care. "That's fantastic. I'd love to see more of your work sometime," she said, smiling in a way that made me acutely aware of how long it had been since someone had looked at me with genuine admiration instead of criticism. The warmth of her shoulder against mine sent an unexpected jolt through my system, a stark reminder of how long it had been since I'd experienced even casual physical contact. I carefully shifted away, uncomfortable with my reaction. Despite the situation with Jessica, I wasn't going to be that guy who starts something new before ending the old. Later, as the group dispersed to their cabins, Emma walked alongside me on the path. "Some of us are planning a sunrise hike tomorrow before the meeting starts," she mentioned. "You should join. Perfect lighting for those landscape shots you love." I agreed, and the next morning found myself standing atop a ridge with Emma and 2 other colleagues as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I took dozens of photographs but found my lens repeatedly drawn to Emma's profile against the dramatic backdrop. Emma represented everything I'd been missing: genuine interest, mutual respect, actual conversation rather than lectures. But I knew I needed to resolve my situation with Jessica before even considering anything else. When I returned home Sunday evening, Jessica was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, something she hadn't done for us in months. The timing was suspicious as hell. "How was the retreat?" she asked, her tone unusually attentive. "Productive," I replied, setting down my bag. "We finalized the strategic plan for next quarter." She nodded, then asked, "I saw some of the photos you posted. Beautiful location." "It was," I agreed, wondering at her sudden interest. "That woman in some of the pictures, is she on your team?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't realized Emma had featured prominently in my uploads. "That's Emma, our new marketing specialist," I answered neutrally. "She's very pretty," Jessica observed, her eyes studying my face. The territorial behavior was rich, coming from someone who had explicitly rejected me. I hadn't really noticed. I lied, feeling oddly defensive. "Really? You've taken about a dozen photos with her in them. Seems like you noticed plenty." The accusatory tone was unmistakable. I chose my next words carefully. "She happened to be in the frame during our group activities." "Why are you asking about this? You made it very clear that certain aspects of our relationship are over. You don't get to dictate who I spend time with professionally." She turned back to the stove, clearly annoyed that I wasn't apologizing or explaining myself further. "Just curious about your colleagues, that's all. I have a right to know who my husband spends time with." That was the moment I decided to accelerate my exit plan. The one-sided nature of her expectations had become unbearable. The following week brought more surprises. Jessica started initiating conversations, asking about my day, even suggesting we watch shows together. She made dinner several times and didn't even pepper the conversation with her usual ideological commentary. It was like living with a completely different person, or rather, with the person I'd married years ago before she'd transformed into a stranger. I knew exactly what was happening. She was trying to re-establish control, to pull me back into orbit now that she sensed I was drifting away. The realization strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about revenge, it was about self-preservation. 2 key events aligned to create the perfect opportunity for my freedom. First, I received a significant promotion at work with a substantial raise and more travel opportunities. I kept this information to myself, not sharing it with Jessica despite her increasingly desperate attempts to engage with me. Second, through my professional network, I learned that Jessica's company was planning major layoffs due to a merger. Her department was likely to be hit hard. This wasn't insider trading or anything illegal, just the kind of information that flows through business connections in our mid-sized city. The timing couldn't have been better. Over the past months, through my networking and new social connections, I'd learned that Jessica's company was planning these layoffs. In fact, I'd helped a colleague's spouse get hired at a competing firm 3 weeks earlier, knowing they'd need someone with Jessica's exact qualifications. I could have easily done the same for Jessica. A single phone call would have secured her an interview at minimum, but I chose not to. Instead, I accelerated my exit strategy. I consulted with a lawyer discreetly, paying in cash from my separate account. I learned exactly what I needed to do to protect myself financially in a divorce. I documented Jessica's declaration about ending physical intimacy, her subsequent behavior, everything that might help my case. I also discovered through casual conversations that Jessica had been bad-mouthing me to her friends and family, painting herself as some kind of victim of the patriarchy, while conveniently omitting her unilateral decision to fundamentally change our marriage. This sealed the deal. My escape needed to be complete and decisive. 2 weeks later, Jessica's company announced the layoffs. She came home visibly shaken. My department might be cut next month, she said, clearly expecting sympathy. I'm really worried. That's tough, I responded, offering basic courtesy but nothing more. I'm sure you'll figure it out. The layoffs happened faster than expected. The following Friday, Jessica came home in tears. I lost my job, she sobbed. They eliminated our entire department. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, maintaining a neutral expression. What's your plan? She looked shocked at my response. My plan? I just lost my job. I need time to process this. Of course, I replied. Take all the time you need. But our financial obligations don't stop. So just let me know how you plan to continue contributing to the household expenses. Her jaw literally dropped. Are you serious right now? I'm in crisis and you're asking about bills? I shrugged. Just being practical. We both contribute equally, right? That's always been your position. The next morning, I made my move. While Jessica was in the shower, I transferred every penny from our joint account into my private account, leaving just enough to avoid overdraft fees. Then I packed a bag with essentials and my most important possessions. When she emerged from the bathroom, I was waiting in the living room with divorce papers. What's this? She asked, eyeing the documents. Divorce papers, I replied calmly. I've realized I deserve better than a one-sided marriage with someone who unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship without discussion or compromise. Her face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief. You can't be serious. Because I wouldn't sleep with you? That's what this is about? No, it's about respect and reciprocity, I said. You made a choice that affected us both, presented it as non-negotiable, and expected me to simply accept it. That's not a partnership, she scoffed. So you're running off with your little work girlfriend? How predictable. This has nothing to do with Emma or anyone else. This is about you and me and the broken agreement between us. By the way, I've moved our joint funds into a separate account that you won't have access to until we reach a settlement. Her face paled. You did what? You can't do that. I just lost my job. How am I supposed to pay for anything? Not my problem, I replied, echoing the same dismissive tone she'd used when ending our physical relationship. You should have considered the potential consequences before making unilateral decisions about our marriage. This is financial abuse, she shouted, tears forming in her eyes. I need that money for basic necessities. No, this is consequences. And speaking of necessities, the mortgage is due next week. I've calculated your half, it's listed in the documents. I'll expect your payment on time. She started to panic visibly. Please, you can't do this. I have no income right now. I need time to find a new job. You should have thought about that before declaring not tonight or any night, and treating me like an accessory to your life rather than a partner. You wanted independence from patriarchal expectations? Congratulations, you've got it. Complete financial independence, too. Over the next week, Jessica's behavior changed dramatically. The feminist rhetoric disappeared, replaced by desperate pleas and attempts to renegotiate. She suggested counseling, hinted at reconsidering her stance on intimacy, even tried seduction one night, which I firmly rejected. My lawyer had advised me not to leave the house yet, so we continued living together in increasingly tense circumstances. Jessica's friends started calling me, telling me how I was being unfair, how I needed to support my wife in her time of need. I blocked their numbers one by one. Her parents reached out next, suggesting we all meet to discuss the situation. I declined politely but firmly. Your daughter made her choice months ago, I told her father over the phone. I'm simply making mine now. 2 weeks into this standoff, Jessica's desperation peaked. She had no job prospects, no access to our joint savings, and bills piling up. She approached me one evening, completely defeated. Please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I need help. I can't do this alone. That's an interesting perspective, I replied coolly. Wasn't it you who told me that women don't need men, that marriage is just a patriarchal construct, that physical intimacy with me was something you could unilaterally end without discussion? I was wrong, she whispered. I got caught up in all these ideas without thinking about what they really meant. Please, I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, rebuild our relationship, whatever you want. The problem is, Jessica, I don't want that anymore. You showed me who you really are, someone who views relationships as transactional, who takes what she wants and discards the rest. Now that you need something from me, suddenly you're willing to reconsider everything. That's not love or partnership, that's opportunism. I stood up, gathering my keys. I'm moving out tomorrow. The divorce papers are ready for your signature. If you contest them, I'm prepared for a legal battle that will drain what little resources you have left. If you sign them as is, I'll provide a one-time payment to help you transition to your new independent life. You planned this all along, she realized, her voice hollow. From the moment I said those words, you were planning your exit. No, I corrected her. I planned this from the moment I realized you saw me as disposable. You taught me an important lesson about self-worth, Jessica, and for that I suppose I should thank you. I moved out the next day into a new apartment I'd secretly secured weeks earlier. Jessica signed the divorce papers without contest, receiving her settlement payment as promised. I heard through mutual friends that she moved back in with her parents in a different state. Her feminist ideals apparently set aside in favor of practical needs. As for me, I continued building my new life, advancing in my career, developing my photography business on the side, maintaining my physical fitness, and yes, eventually starting a genuine relationship with Emma, who showed me what real partnership looks like. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, my first photography exhibition opened at a local gallery. Among the images on display was a striking landscape taken at dawn on that company retreat. The morning I realized I deserved better. The greatest revenge wasn't taking Jessica's financial security or even her dignity. It was becoming the man I should have been all along, confident, self-sufficient, and unwilling to accept anything less than a genuine reciprocal relationship. In trying to diminish me, she inadvertently set me free. Sometimes Jessica still tries to contact me, especially when she's struggling financially. I maintain minimal business-like communication as needed to finalize any remaining legal matters, but otherwise have moved on completely. Our mutual friends eventually learned the full story, and most understood my position, even if they felt I was harsh in my execution. But here's the thing about consequences. They're not harsh or kind, they're just inevitable. Jessica chose to destroy the foundation of our marriage while expecting the structure to remain standing. When it collapsed, she was simply experiencing the natural outcome of her own actions. This experience taught me that self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. And sometimes, the most powerful response to someone who treats you as disposable is to simply agree with them and walk away, not in anger or bitterness, but with the calm certainty that you deserve more than they're willing to give. So, if you're listening this and recognizing your own relationship in my story, know that you have choices. You don't have to accept unilateral changes to your marriage. You don't have to diminish yourself to accommodate someone else's ideology. And most importantly, you don't have to wait for permission to start building a life that fulfills you. The person who tries to change the rules without your input is telling you exactly how much they value your voice in the relationship. Listen to what they're really saying, not just with their words but with their actions, and then decide if that's enough for you.